The create step creates the site structure based on a list of categories defined in categories.py. So basically, I import this giant set of dictionaries that contains, I wish I could bring it up, but I can't, it would be too much. It's just a dictionary of lookups that has file system paths. So for the language service, English has a key, it's keyed on the language service, and then all the paths to like different categories of news, like news, weather, sports, on the file system that we know about, that we know we're going to be importing. Migrate, then once this site structure exists, then of course we can put the objects where they go. Migrate does that, migrate step does that. It walks the file system and extracts the contents, calls the factory on the new object that it wants to create, and then it does mutators to put the text and other things into the storage. That's the most basic description of what it does. It also does a few other things, which in hindsight I probably should not have promised to do because I'm still working on it. But what it does is rename the file essentially. So instead of a story that is buried deep into the site, much like a file system path, we rename the stories to this shorter version with the date in the front, the slug they call it, which is basically the subject, and then the file extension. So, for better or worse, I'm not sure if that's the best name for the URL, but that's what they wanted. So, and then also they wanted to change category names. So if English news, they wanted to call it English exciting news, we had to, with every story that we encountered, we had to check, if this is a story that should be renamed, and switch the category on the fly. Then audio and images for every story on the file system were grabbed and either shoved into the story type, which was folderish, or shoved into a field.
Why did you choose to rename things from the date conversion in the URL rather than like having Apache or something do a rewrite rule to keep those URLs?
That's a very good question. They basically didn't. They asked for the renaming, and they didn't care about backwards anything. And I didn't think of it at the time. Now, if I were doing it, I would say, hey, you're going to break all your URLs, and there would be ways to deal with that. Maybe Apache, like Joel said, or maybe the redirection tool that Plone has, that you could tell this object all the things that it answers to. I could have done, and we could still do that, but it wasn't an issue for them.
That would be a heck of a stress test. The redirection tool.
It would be. I mean, I think it would work. But,
yeah.
And that stuff's easy to do programmatically. Next, please. They also said, oh, by the way, each story has related links, and we want them to still work. And I said, okay, well, there's one big problem with that, and that is that we're breaking all the URLs, which I guess if we didn't break them, that would have been one way to handle it. But I thought of maybe I can rename I can see what the related story link is, and then see if I can rename that, and then create a link to where I think the story would be. So this is what we went with, and this mostly works. It's a little bit complicated by the fact that we were changing categories, so they are at the moment complaining that some of this does not work. There was another big issue that breaks this that no one thought about, which is that for some reason I don't want to blame Bricolage, but they were publishing these stories 5 or 6 times under different URLs, the same exact story. So at some point somebody noticed, pretty early on actually, that there were 5 or 6 stories that were exactly the same title in different places in the new site. So at some point we had to go and remove the duplicates, and that breaks. These links sometimes point to those related links. The overarching theme here is that you should definitely, I thought I was clearly defining the scope of this, but I have a hard time saying no because they kept wanting features, and so we kept adding. it really is good to, if you can at all help it, have a clear set. If it's a large project, this is a talk about a fairly large scale project. Hopefully on a lot of Plone migrations, the typical migration won't have this sort of issue with scale and encountering lots of things as you go on. Problems. So RFA has 10 language services, 208,566 stories at the time of me writing this PowerPoint. 5 different encodings, 70 gigabytes of content on the file system. Excuse me, mostly probably audio and images. Excuse me, and hundreds of categories. Also, the images were not where you'd expect them, like with the story. They were scattered all over the file system. Same with audio, and the duplicates that I just mentioned. And that's the duplicate issue that I mentioned. During the time since we started and up until now, in that time, build-out became tremendously popular as a way of putting together and deploying sites. We're still using build-it, and I avoided build-it because I didn't understand it. 90% of the way through the migration, I sucked it up and learned build-it to figure out how to just do some things that really needed to be done, like upgrading the version of Plone and that sort of thing. And also at the same time, shoving my code or deploying my code with the Plone and the site product that Agendalist developed. So that's very useful. I would say do that first. Use build out, put your stuff where it belongs, give instructions to whoever the client is, regarding this is how you render the code. Because I'm now finding myself, doing a lot of this rather than just giving them the instructions, which I could easily do had I done it that way in the first place. And then, of course, build out. How many people use build out? Build out gives you a bin instance which you start your site with. You could get fancy and have it do a bin migrate and make your life a lot easier. I'll show briefly how I run this, but it'll have to be from, I don't know how to do it. Next, please. So, the cool thing about this migration was that it was pretty much from the start we were getting stuff into Zone, feeling good about it, showing the client results, and yay. Switching to Unicode, converting to Unicode, and so. But it was a very long process from that point to them getting to know their own system and me doing all these tweaks to make things warm and fuzzy for people. But now it's down to like a science, and so to run it, I run the build out, or to end up with, to start with their Bricolage site and end up with a Plone site. These are the basic steps that we now know after a year or so of doing this. I should say one other thing right here that I'm thinking about. Do not let them touch the site before you're ready to launch it, because personally, I always want to blow it away and start over, and I really want to run this migration over and over until I get the best possible run and dump the content in and then ship it. This was not, you don't have to do it that way, but it's a personal preference, and this is not that way. We basically are using the same DataFS that they started with, a year and 6 months ago. So you can imagine that DataFS has seen better days. But it does work, and we can do any fix we need to do to launch. I just wouldn't do it that way again. I wouldn't let them do it that way. So